I'm Diane Macedo. Today on ABC News Live, President Biden's primetime warning. With 5 days to midterms, the president says democracy is on the ballot, with hundreds of election deniers running for office across the country. The latest from the campaign trail and reaction from Republicans. Security questions are mounting for the second in line to the presidency. The new details emerging about the attack on Speaker Pelosi's husband in their own home. And it's Native American Heritage Month. We're looking at the Indigenous creators making their mark on pop culture, the new age of representation in Hollywood, and why some are saying this moment should become a movement. But we begin with President Biden making his closing argument ahead of Election Day. In a primetime address, the president condemned political violence and urged voters to protect democracy, calling out election deniers led by former President Trump. This as Republicans argue Americans are worried about other issues like the economy and inflation. Chief White House correspondent Cecilia Vega has the latest.
It was a midterm closing argument and an urgent warning about the future of democracy as we know it.
I know there's a lot at stake in these midterm elections, from our economy to the safety of our streets to our personal freedoms. But there's something else at stake: democracy itself.
Right out of the gate, President Biden started with a graphic description of the attack on Nancy Pelosi's husband, a personal friend.
It's hard to even say. After the assailant entered the home asking, "Where's Nancy? Where's Nancy?"
The president saying there is no place for political intimidation or violence in this country.
This intimidation, this violence against Democrats, Republicans, and nonpartisan officials just doing their jobs are the consequence of lies told for power and profit.
A political speech delivered in a telling location, just blocks away from the U.S. Capitol that was under siege on January 6th. And President Biden not mincing words about who he blames for what he calls an assault on democracy, former President Trump.
He has abused his power and put the loyalty to himself before loyalty to the Constitution.
But the president making it clear he does not blame all Republicans.
The extreme MAGA element of the Republican Party, which is a minority of that party, but is this driving force. We can't ignore the impact this is having on our country. It's damaging, it's corrosive, and it's destructive.
Hey, Diane, listen to this. Nearly half of the Republican candidates running in these midterms are considered election deniers, or they have questioned the integrity of the 2020 election. And so that is why you are seeing President Biden give this speech right now. He says this is an election that is a struggle for the very soul of America.
All right, Cecilia Vega, thank you for that. And let's bring in White House correspondent Karen Travers for more on the big issues ahead of Election Day. Karen, you talk with radio hosts across America every day about these issues, but you say no one's asking about political violence or threats at the ballot box. Republicans are criticizing the president, saying he's focused on the wrong thing here, that this isn't what Americans care about right now. Are they right?
You know, Diane, there's far less interest when the president gives a speech like the one he gave last night on threats to American democracy than when he talks about, say, gas prices or the economy or inflation. The speech last night didn't seem to cut through when you look at the questions I was getting asked today. A lot of why was the president talking about this? Didn't we hear him give this speech in Philadelphia a couple weeks ago? And what was new there from the president? Why was he doing this just days out from the midterm election? And, you know, a lot of people are asking, when you look at those polls and people say it's the economy, inflation, gas prices, is the president missing that when he's giving a speech like last night? But as you heard Cecilia say there in her report, you know, the president says, yes, those issues are important, but this is something he wanted to talk about last night because he also thinks this is something that he needs to underline. This is something Americans need to be paying attention to.
Now, our latest ABC News and Ipsos poll shows, as you say, the economy and inflation are the most important issues to voters. So what are you hearing from stations on that front?
Yeah, that's the big thing that people want to talk about. They want to know what the White House is doing on those big things. And you know, I think there's also a recognition that some of it is baked in right now, and there's not much the White House can do at this point, especially with just days until the midterm elections, in terms of how it will impact their vote. Diane, I was outside Philadelphia last week reporting on the campaign trail, talking to voters for a full day, and it was really striking to hear Republicans say their vote is going to be based on the economy and inflation and gas prices. prices, and Democrats saying their vote was going to be based on the economy and inflation and gas prices. But they were so entrenched in what their decisions were going to be, no wiggle room there. Democrats were saying they didn't think it was all President Biden's fault, that there was still a lot of lag from COVID and the shutdowns, and Republicans saying they didn't think that the White House was doing enough to address their concerns, and it was time for a change in Washington.
Now, abortion is the next most important issue in our poll, and it's been a main focus for Democrats. Do you get a lot of questions about that topic?
I do when the president talks about it, but Diane, you know, he's really not done it in a big way. He gave a speech in Washington a couple weeks ago, and we had a lot of questions about that to the White House. Why was he doing it here in Washington? Why talk about abortion at a political event here in the nation's capital and not on the campaign trail, not with candidates in battleground states, not in a state like Michigan, where abortion is actually on the ballot? The White House defended the decision to do it here, saying he talks about it in all of his campaign events. But it was notable that if you're going to shine a spotlight on an issue like that, he didn't really shine a big spotlight. So abortion comes up when the president talks about it in a big way. But again, the economy is still the #1 thing. And when the president talks about the economy, that's always the thing that gets the biggest attention.
Now, President Biden is set to give remarks on student debt relief today before hitting the campaign trail again. What can we expect there?
Yeah, he's going to talk about efforts that New Mexico is making. That's where he's campaigning today to try and give free education, free college education to people in that state. He's also going to talk about his own efforts to relieve student debt. Now, of course, you know, you and I have talked about this. It's held up in court right now. The president trying to relieve up to $10,000 in federal student loans for some Americans, up to $20,000 for other Americans. But they can't send that payment out. They can't send that relief out right now as it's making its way through the court system. It's a big blow to the White House because they really wanted to get some of that money out before the midterm elections to be able to say, hey, we're delivering for you as people start heading to the polls.
All right, Karen Travers, great to have you. Thank you.
Thanks.
And ABC News Live will have complete coverage all day long of the 2022 midterms on Election Day, Tuesday, November 8th. That begins at 7 a.m. Eastern, and special election night coverage led by David Muir, Lindsay Davis, and the entire political team begins at 7 p.m. Eastern. We also have a special look at the potential for violence at the ballot box with senior national correspondent Terry Moran this week on Impact. Watch it streaming now exclusively on Hulu. And questions are growing about possible security lapses as we learn new details about the attack on House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband. Officials say Paul Pelosi awoke to find the attacker standing over him. Now Capitol Police say they've launched an internal security review and are working to beef up protection for members of Congress. Mola Lenghi is in San Francisco with more.
New questions about the security surrounding House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, seen flanked by her security detail Wednesday, leaving her San Francisco home after that violent attack on her husband, Paul, at the Pelosi's house. Sources now confirmed to ABC News Pelosi's home had a private security system set up that was supposed to notify law enforcement if there was an intrusion, but it's unclear if that alarm ever went off. This, in addition to those surveillance cameras from U.S. Capitol Police that we now know were not being actively monitored because the speaker was not home.
There was no Capitol Police, there was no private security present at the time.
Now, calls growing for enhanced security around members of Congress. Democratic Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren writing in a 4-page letter, the incident and related circumstance raised significant questions about security protections for members of Congress. This, as the San Francisco DA's office reveals chilling new details about the assault.
This was a targeted attack. This was not a random residential burglary.
Writing in a court filing, David DePape allegedly startled Mr. Pelosi awake with a large hammer in his right hand and several white plastic zip ties in his left hand, and later struck Mr. Pelosi in the head at full force with the hammer, which knocked Mr. Pelosi unconscious. Pelosi remaining unresponsive for about 3 minutes, waking up in a pool of his own blood. Prosecutors say DePape told authorities he was on a suicide mission, that he planned to target not only Speaker Pelosi, but other politicians.
Mola Lenghi, thank you for that. And coming up, politicians have been trying to reach young voters using TikTok, but some are questioning if the platform is even safe to use. More on that when we come back. With midterms now just days away, candidates are doing everything they can to get out the vote, including using TikTok. Some are on the platform trying to reach young voters, but is it actually working? And why are security concerns keeping some politicians off the app? Alex Perche went to Florida to find out.
In the battleground state of Florida, this is what traditional campaigning looks like. Politicians stumping for votes in the Villages, an active retirement community where the average voter is 72. But there's a new battleground to reach younger voters online. TikTok has captured a younger generation's attention, and the platform is now being used by some politicians and political groups looking to tap into the youth vote this midterm election.
You know why gas is costing so much money these days? Because of Joe Biden's mismanagement of our energy production.
I am ready on day one to take on the cartels and anybody who gets in the way of Arizona being Arizona. So join Shorty and me and vote November 8th.
What is so important about having a social presence, specifically on TikTok now?
The young people are on social media, right? And so it's important to reach every voter, either online or offline.
Put some respect on my name. You already know what it is. Respect on my name.
Val Demings is a former police chief turned congresswoman who's now running for Senate as a Democrat in Florida against Republican incumbent Senator Marco Rubio.
How good it feels to be back in the Villages.
She's been using TikTok to try to rally young voters across the Sunshine State.
You know, I have 4 granddaughters and 1 grandson. And my granddaughters, who are dancers, spend quite a bit of time on TikTok. And so they were always telling me I should get on TikTok, And I thought that was something I was never going to do, but I did. And I said, okay, I'm gonna do this dance, and let's see what happens. The response was unbelievable.
So you're a believer now?
I'm a believer.
Demings' videos have gotten more than 1.5 million likes. But could they actually inspire any young Floridians to head to the polls? We're here at the University of Central Florida. Let's find out.
TikTok is definitely a way to appeal to the younger crowd.
We asked several college students how they felt about politics making its way onto TikTok.
I'll probably, watch it and then just skip it.
Would you be more motivated to go to the polls?
I think so, yeah. Just because it's like they're actually making an effort to get in touch with the youth in still a tasteful way.
In the last midterm election, TikTok was just beginning to come onto the political stage, but now it has captured the eyeballs of close to 100 million Americans and especially young Americans. And so wherever there are the eyeballs of voters, politicians are going to go there and try to capture their attention and make their pitch.
According to a recent Pew poll, 26% of adults under 30 regularly get their news on TikTok. Democrats have been actively pursuing TikTok influencers as a way to get more votes. President Joe Biden just invited 8 TikTok stars to Washington in the hopes of leveraging their more than 67 million followers.
When it comes time to voting, you're going to have to get up.
On the other hand, many Republicans have been harshly critical of the app, which originated in China. Owned by tech company ByteDance, TikTok's famous algorithm is shrouded in secrecy, making lawmakers fearful of it posing a security risk from the Chinese government. Back in 2020, former President Donald Trump attempted to shut the app down until federal courts blocked him.
My concern about TikTok is that everything that users put on TikTok and everything they do on their phones can conceivably be accessed by government employees in China. There needs to be a firewall between TikTok and American TikTok users and Beijing.
TikTok formally addressed those concerns back in September when COO Vanessa Pappas, along with several other social media companies, testified on Capitol Hill.
We do have employees based in China. We also have very strict access controls around the type of data that they can access and where that data is stored, which is here in the United States. And we've also said under no circumstances would we give that data to China.
And like other social media companies, TikTok has faced concerns about the spread of misinformation and disinformation related to elections on its platform. TikTok telling ABC News in a statement, "We take our responsibility to protect the integrity of our platform and elections with utmost seriousness. We continue to invest in our policy, safety, and security teams to counter election misinformation, and we provide access to authoritative information in more than 45 languages through our election center."
Your opponent
in this Senate race is not on TikTok. Marco Rubio is not on TikTok. He's also on the Senate Intelligence Committee. He's been critical of the platform. You're on the House Intelligence Committee. I'm curious, do you share some of his concerns?
As someone who's been in protecting us for a long time, we have to do that, have a level of consciousness in all things, not just pick and choose. And so I would not be on TikTok if I felt that it posed a greater security risk. I wouldn't do it.
But in an election that will likely be determined by turnout, Deming says she's trying to reach young voters who tend to support Democrats when they decide to vote.
John Lewis was 17 years old when he became involved in the civil rights movement. Dr. King was 26 years old when he became the leader of the civil rights movement. We cannot do anything great in this nation without the young people being a major part of it. I know that, and they know that, and we're going to do everything that we can to make sure they are informed, because we need them to be engaged.
Our thanks to Alex Prochet for that report. Coming up, it's Native American Heritage Month. We're looking at the Indigenous creators making their mark on pop culture when we come back. Welcome back. We're celebrating Native American Heritage Month by highlighting Indigenous creators in Hollywood and pop culture. It's a moment that some say should become a movement for Native Americans who in recent years have had little representation in front of and behind Hollywood's cameras. Now, with the success of a number of TV shows and upcoming films about Indigenous people, the face of stardom is changing. Deborah Roberts has more.
We could be in California as soon as 2 months.
If you've watched much television lately, you've probably noticed new faces and storylines. From this summer's Prey, featuring a majority Indigenous cast and crew, to Reservation Dogs, a humorous take on reservation life.
You're good thieves, best in town. Oh, thank you. It is a small town.
The critically acclaimed show just renewed for a third season and opening doors to Indigenous representation.
We're giving children a chance to see themselves on screen. I can see it myself at being at this age that it's changing my perspectives, and I can just only imagine what it's like for the younger generation to see that.
Devery Jacobs, starring as Alora, is one of its breakout stars.
Being a part of a show like Reservation Dogs, where it's by Indigenous people and it's for Indigenous people, and it's so fueled with a love for our communities, and there's no explaining or spoon feeding to non-Native audiences.
Now, gracing magazine covers, she's even been named one of Time magazine's 100 Next Most Influential Artists. Even writing an episode of Reservation Dogs.
Cheese. Did you want to say the blessing?
Drawing on her childhood in the Ganawege Mohawk territory.
You have said that you've almost got to find humor in the pain of the life that so many of these people live. Why is humor important in this story?
I feel like humor is the glue that's kept our communities together. And if you think about it, like, Indigenous folk have already been through genocide of our communities, and what's left for us is to celebrate ourselves and to lean on our community. And when there's nothing left to do, you kind of have to laugh it off.
We ask you to bless this food and the people that cooked it. Our friend Alora here, as her grandma transcends into that place in the great beyond, in a galaxy far, far away.
It's major progress since 2019, when Native Americans barely accounted for 1% of acting or staff writing jobs in Hollywood.
We've been doing this for thousands of years. We're storytellers, and it's finally just happening that Hollywood's catching on to it and seeing the vast, rich stories that we do have.
Deborah Roberts, thank you for that report. And I'd like to bring in Crystal Echo Hawk, founder and executive director of Illuminative, a Native woman-led social and racial justice nonprofit organization dedicated to building power for Native people. Crystal, thank you so much for joining us. You know, your organization has conducted some research that suggests the vast majority of Americans know very little about Native people. What do you make of that?
Well, thank you, Diane, for having me on. And yes, our research found that nearly 80% of Americans know little to nothing about Native peoples. And the reason why is because of big systems like K through 12 education. A study conducted by Professor Sarah Scheer found that nearly 90% of schools in the country don't teach about Native Americans past 1900. We face great erasure in TV and film. Our representation across TV and film counts for less than 0.4%. Up until very recently, we've had very little representation within all levels of government. And you really began to look at that erasure through media, entertainment, education, government has really left the majority of Americans thinking that Native Americans sort of ceased to exist by 1900. In fact, a study conducted found that nearly 90% of the images on Google when you type in Native American come up pre-1900. So the erasure has been really, really profound. And that's why the majority of Americans today, many wonder if we still exist, and certainly do not know a lot about contemporary Native peoples.
Why is Native American representation in TV and film so important, particularly when it comes to modern portrayals?
Well, because one, for looking at Hollywood and TV and film, Hollywood generates 80% of the world's content. Right. When we think about what we consume, and we think increasingly, I think we look at the trend lines where more and more Americans are not only just watching, TV and streaming and all the things for entertainment. I mean, it's where they get their news. It's like how people are forming and shaping their opinions. So we understand that this is a really, really important space for contemporary Native representation, because this is more likely where we're going to be able to reach more Americans to show, for example, like on Reservation Dogs, how wonderful and complex and dynamic and funny our communities are. And I think that, there's so many universal themes, I think, in some of these new shows, whether it's Rutherford Falls, Reservation Dogs, and others, that really Americans begin to kind of see that we are not these exotic, ancient, romanticized, or tragic figures from the past. We're really vibrant, dynamic, I think hilarious, complex people just like everybody else. And so we know that we, through the power of TV and film and entertainment and media, we know that we can reach a lot more people and move a lot more hearts and minds for Americans to see who we are today.
Now, as representation increases, some are now saying this moment should become a movement. What do you think that means? What does that look like?
I think historically within Hollywood, we've had, you kind of look at case studies around other populations. I think about Asian American population where, you have these big sort of bursts, right? You have these wonderful movies that kind of come out, Joy Luck Club, or Crazy Rich Asians. And then all of a sudden you don't see a lot more of stories from this particular community, right? And I think that we've seen that with Native peoples. We don't want this just to be a couple one-offs. And as much as we are so excited, again, about these new shows, Reservation Dogs, Rutherford Falls, Spirit Rangers is a huge kids show that's really doing well on Netflix right now. We want to make sure that we're not happy with just a handful of shows. We want to see sustained representation, contemporary representation of Native peoples. That is so critical. But we know right now we're already starting to see a backlash in Hollywood where some major studios have been announcing sort of cutting back diversity programming and really sort of, making the case that people maybe aren't as interested in some of these diverse stories. But studies really show that diverse representation is bringing new audiences. And we're actually going to be publishing new data next year that really proves that.
All right, Crystal Echo Hawk, great to have you. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm Diane Macedo. Do stay with us as ABC News Live continues with more news, context, and analysis.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.